What's up, brothers and sisters? It's your brother G World 7_D. Here's a book called The Tuscarola War: Indians, Settlers, and the Fight for the Carolina Colonies. Now, this is a book and it's by author David Lee Veary. If I'm pronouncing his name correct. We're going to turn to page 179. 179. Okay. Read a few things right here. Alright, let's see. On Good Friday, April 15, 1715, a confederacy of Indians made a surprise attack on South Carolina. These included the Yamasse, the Goules, the Appalachians, the Savannahs, the Tuscarolas, the Catawba, the Wateries, and most of the Siouan nations. The Wakamas, Cape Fears, and to the west the Lower Creeks, the Uchis, and the Cherokees, all have been allies of South Carolina, and many of their warriors have fought alongside Barnwell and Moore in North Carolina. Scores of South Carolina traders and officials then visiting Indian towns were killed instantly. Down near St. Helena and Port Royal, where Barnwell lived, his old friends, the Yamasse, struck early that morning. A wounded soldier managed to swim to Barnwell's doctor's plantation and raise the alarm. Fortunately for Barnwell and other settlers nearby, a ship carrying contraband had been seized and was in port. Now 400 settlers crowded onto the boat and so escaped the quickly advancing Yamasse army. The Port Royal settlement was destroyed. Other plantations across South Carolina were also hit, more settlers killed, and so began what was called the Yamasse War. Remember, these are all Negroes. I showed you a picture of the Yamasse, but like the Tuscarola War, the Yamasse War was partially a result of the many abuses suffered by these Indians at the hands of South Carolina traders and settlers. The Indians had finally had enough and now struck back, but lessons the warriors had learned in the Tuscarola War now bore fruit. One thing they all had seen was that colonial forces were not going to accept any peace or abide by any treaty until their Indian enemies were broken and enslaved. There could never be a peace among equals, as Carolinians were too invested in the Indian slave trade. But now, after the Tuscarola War, the supply of enemy Indians available for enslavement had dwindled dramatically. Since the turn of the 18th century, South Carolina slave traders and their Indian allies had destroyed and enslaved many of the Spanish Florida's Mission Indians, pushed back the French allied Indians of the American Southeast, and now the Tuscaroras, the Bear River Indians, and others had been taken. Nevertheless, South Carolina's thirst for Indian slaves remained unquenchable. The Yamasse and others realized it was only a matter of time before South Carolina would turn on them. Better to stand together as Indians, hit the colony now before it became any stronger. Kill the traders, destroy the plantations, burn Charlestown, and put an end to the slave buyers. And by the end of that bad Good Friday, it looked as if their plan was working. South Carolina was on its heels and the Indians closing in on Charlestown. Poor condition by the Indians gave South Carolina a chance to get on its feet. The militia was called up, and now Lieutenant James Moore raised 3 regiments and built a chain of fortifications around Charlestown. He dispatched some militiamen against the Yamasse south of Charlestown, who were at the time making most of the attacks. In a sharp skirmish, the Yamasse lost some of their leaders. By June, the Yamasse attacks had stopped. Charlestown's southern front seemed quiet when the Tuscarolas, the Wateries, the Santees, the Catawba, and other Siouan peoples along the Santee River to the north now made their own attacks. Again, settlers were killed, farms and plantations burned, refugees poured into Charlestown. South Carolina needed help, and so sent out calls for assistance to other colonies. North Carolina, Governor Eldon and Council President Pollock saw this as an opportunity to return a favor to South Carolina. Eden immediately called up the colonial militia. He ordered 2 regiments be created, one of about 30 men to be commanded by former South Carolina Colonel Theophilus Hastings, who had also remained in North Carolina. This was to be outfitted and sent by ship to Charlestown. The 2nd regiment was to be commanded by now Colonel Maurice Moore, who was to raise a regiment of 50 men, but also recruit from North Carolina's Indian allies, sellouts. They were to march overland to South Carolina. Eventually, Moore will have a force of about 50 militiamen and 70 Tuscarola and Corps warriors who saw this as an opportunity to strike back at the Indians who had done them so much damage. Negroes going against Negroes. In the meantime, militiamen would patrol between the Pamlico and Neuse River on the lookout for any hostile Indians coming North Carolina's way. This time Virginia also helped and sent about 200 men to Charlestown. 2 North Carolina companies left for Charlestown that summer. Rather than the roundabout western route he and his brother had used to enter North Carolina, Maurice Moore Company marched south along the coast into a more direct line towards Charlestown. At the Cape Fear River, Moore scouts discovered the Cape Fear Indians and the Waccamaws planning an ambush. Moore struck first, catching them by surprise. His troops took 80 captives, which they later sold as slaves in Charlestown, and seized a large cache of weapons that the Cape Fear said had come from the Tuscarola Indians further west. By the time Moore's and Hastings companies arrived in Charlestown, South Carolina's situation had changed. Some attacks on the Tuscarolas and Santees had quieted the front, while Yamasse's fighting in the south briefly flared up again. But South Carolina officials realized that the linchpin to the Indian alliance and the key to the war were the Cherokees. A combined attack by the Cherokees in Lower Creeks could devastate the colony, perhaps fatally. The Cherokees had to be persuaded to change sides or at least remain neutral. For the risky diplomatic mission, South Carolina chose Colonel Maurice Moore. In early January 1716, Moore led an expedition of 500 men to Cherokee territory out west in the Appalachian Mountains. Both North and Carolina companies in Colonel Hastings were part of the army. Their job was not to attack the Cherokees, but to impress them and convince them to abandon the Indian alliance, sellouts. Moore must have been very skillful in his diplomacy, as he convinced the Cherokee to do just that. Although the reasons are not entirely clear, the Cherokees killed all the Creek ambassadors then in their towns, trying to convince them to make war on South Carolina. With the Cherokees changing sides, the Yamasse War essentially came to an end, so they sold them out. The historians Lawrence Lee called Maurice Moore's diplomatic victory the single most important accomplishment of the Yamasse War. Now the Creeks moved further west. The Yamassees withdrew into Spanish Florida. The Catawba and smaller Siouan nations made peace. The last holdouts were the Tuscarolas, and many of them moved into North Carolina and occupied some of the abandoned Tuscarola forts along Contanee Creek. By 1717, South Carolina was at peace, but the war had taught it a hard lesson. Abuses by traders and an unregulated Indian slave trade had been some of the reasons for both the Tuscarola and Yamasse wars. Now South Carolina actually began regulating its traders. But times were changing. While Indian slaves could be found on North Carolina and South Carolina farms and plantations for years to come, the Indian slave trade was on its last legs. There were fewer Indians available for enslavement, and as both colonies discovered, taking Indian allies as slaves was a recipe for war. Besides, as the competition for North American empires heated up between England and France, the colonies needed Indian allies far more than they needed Indian slaves. The increasing influx of African and African American slaves soon took their place as the colonial laborers of choice. That's a lie, because there was no such thing as an African American. And there weren't that many African slaves brought here. You got to catch some of this stuff. From Barnwell, the Yamasse War was personally devastating. His plantation had been plundered and burned, and tens of his own slaves were taken by Indians and sold to the Spanish in St. Augustine. But just as bad was the breaking of their bond of trust and affection between him and the Yamasses. He loved them and believed they loved him back. They stuck by him after the Battle of Tarhunta in February 1712, when all the other Indians had deserted. They fought beside him throughout his Tuscarola campaign. They were the only Indians he knew he could rely on. But somewhere along the way, something had gone wrong in the relationship, and they had burned his plantation. Oh man! All right. Now the Yamasses were gone. We settled further south in Florida. For years, Barnwell tried to arrange a peace between them and South Carolina and have them return to the colony, where they would take their old place on the frontier to serve as buffers against enemy Indians. He was also appointed as one of the 5 Indian commissioners whose job it was to oversee the Indian trade and prevent abuses by white traders. But the Yamasse would never return to Barnwell in South Carolina. Isn't that something? Now I'm going to go further over here. In a strange turn of events, the 60 or 70 Tuscarora Wars Colonel Maurice Moore had led to fight in the Yamasse War never returned to North Carolina. As the Yamasse withdrew into Florida, South Carolina had no Indian allies on the southwestern frontier to protect it from Spain and its Indian friends. Colonial officials asked Tuscaroras to remain in South Carolina and patrol the lower Savannah River. This put them near Barnwell and Port Royal. Thus the Tuscaroras served well and were respected by South Carolina government. For every Tuscarora killed in the line of duty, South Carolina pledged to return at the colony's expense a Tuscarora slave taken in either Barnwell's or Moore's expedition. And for every enemy Indian they captured, they could exchange him or her for an enslaved Tuscarora. They stayed in South Carolina for so long that they were eventually granted lands that once belonged to the Yamasse. It seemed somehow fitting that Barnwell could more or less take them under his wing and befriend them. Now, let me stop right there, man. The tricks and trade that the Spanish, the English, and French did, and the greed that some of our people had to fight amongst each other, but to actually working aside these enemy Europeans who was coming over here to help steal land. You see, they stole the land from the Yamasse, ended up giving to another group. Then they later on ended up taking from them. This was a big downfall here in Americas, man. Our in-house fighting amongst each other, which we did then and which we're still doing today. Now, like I said before, I brought the Yamasse and Tuscarora. These are 2 Negroes. Now I'm gonna show you a picture of the Yamasse again, and I want to hammer this hard because this is really getting on my nerves, man. With these goofy Pan-Africans denying true history. Let me see if I can pull this book, find a book with the Yamasse. I may have trouble finding the book. I have it here somewhere, but I may not find it now because I had some. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay. This is Yamasse. All right. These, like I said, these are all black people here in America, man. These are all so-called black people here in America. In the Americas, man. So this is Yamasse. Notice they're wearing the turbans on their head. Some of them wearing the fez, man. All right. This brother look like he has a fez. Get it clear. But there was another brother. He's not in this picture. Had a turban in his head, and he had feathers there, man. This was a Yamasse. These were Negroes. All right. These are Negroes, and you cannot. This cannot be denied no more, man. This cannot be denied. The information there is in your face, but you gotta have to want to learn it and try to grow with it. You know. This is our information. It's right there in our face. And I want to show you another book again, because I'm going to eventually talk about this one too. I showed it before, but I'm going to show it again. Because I'm trying to give you all this. We need all the information we can. We need to get together, get in study groups. I showed this book before, I'm showing it again. Okay. The Middle Ground. Indians, Empires, and Republics in the Great Lakes region from 1650 to 1815. Alright. This is obviously Indian. Alright. In the Midwest area, which they call the Fox Indian, but that's not the real type, but it was called the Fox Indian. You know, they had the Fox Lakes, but these are so-called Fox Indians, man. The Midwest. Notice the tattoos he have on him. His legs, his thigh, his chest, and his body. Some of the Indians here did have tattoos. Some of them didn't. You know, he has the bow and arrow. He has the bow and arrows behind him. They was considered to be great fighters and great warriors. All right. And he has some of them sided with the French. This is like a downfall to many of our people, man. Siding with these Europeans against other tribes. But this is something. This is obviously Negro. I'm gonna turn in the book. I'm gonna show you. If I can find it, a page of obviously is inside the book. In 1 second, let me see if I can find it. Okay, because this is something that we really, we really need to do the research on our history, because the information is there, but you're gonna have to want to get it. You know, it's you're gonna have to do the research. I spent a lot of money doing a lot of research, man. I spent a lot of money doing this research, man. So it's a little easier for me, but you can still do it, man. But you can't just do a simple Google search. That's not gonna get you anywhere, man. Doing a simple Google search is not gonna get you a damn place, because that's simplistic. Here's the picture again. It's inside the book. And the Fox Indians, so-called Fox Indians, they didn't really call themselves that. You know, they had various different names that they called themselves, but not the Fox Indians. All right, but they would know there's the Fox Indians. So our information, man, is out there, but it's been buried, man, buried deep, and we've been totally lied to. So when you hear these goofy Pan-Africans tell you that you just come from slaves, or these are Photoshop pictures of so-called Africans and everything, this is no. These books, none of these books are written by that I have. Over 90% of them, or hell, over 97% of my books, 98% of my books, 99.9% of my books are not even by black scholars. All right. Not saying that getting white people is better, but the fact is that these people know the truth, man. A lot of these scholars know the truth, but unfortunately, these Negro scholars are trained to continue to have you chasing the tail that's not there. So, but our information's there. And like I said, this book deals with the black Indians in the Midwest. Now, they don't use the term black because they try to cover that up, but these are obviously black people. Now, you can go online and find more pictures of the so-called Fox Indians. You know, so, and that's the Midwest, going to Michigan and Illinois. They were all here. So when people tell you that DeSabo was the first black man in Chicago, man, there was black people here before him, man. so, but I'm just, man, our history's all over. So, but this is what I read here is excellent and exceptional, and is dealing with the Tuscarola and the Yamasse Indians and their different wars, man, that they had here in Americas with the Europeans. So I'm going to end that. Say peace and love. This is my video for today. I'm going to try to find my book on Ohio archaeology. I'm still looking for my Etruscan book, that I'm going to show you the pictures to show you that those people were unquestionably Negroes. So there's no debate about those Romans. They were unquestionably Negroes. So I got to try to find that book. I'm still looking for that book, but I wanted to just give you this quick piece. Get this on the weekend. I may try to do another one. Maybe tomorrow or Sunday. I'll try to do another one. All right then, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.